1934, Mississippi, the creepy secret of dozens of graves in the vacant lot. The summer heat clung to Lafayette like a fever, heavy and persistent, turning the air into a shimmering haze over the cotton fields. A fire had swept through the outskirts last week, leaving the land scorched and the faint smell of ash lingering. The town was weary, its people trudging through the days with the lethargy of grief, picking through what the flames had spared. On Pine Hollow Road, the orchards, once the pride of the county, now stood half-charred, the apple trees drooping like mourners at a funeral. It was on that quiet, wounded morning that he appeared. But before we go any further, I must warn you, the path we are about to take leads deep underground. It requires you to be willing to listen to the whispers from below, where the line between life and death blurs, because this story will prove that the most terrifying seeds are not sown in darkness, but nurtured in broad daylight by hands the whole town trusted. If you are not afraid to get your hands dirty, if you believe some truths need to be unearthed no matter how rotten they may be, then you have found the right place. Let me know you're ready by leaving a comment below with an image of a dry leaf or a seed. Let us know from where in the world your fire of curiosity is lit. Together, we will turn over this forgotten soil. He arrived like a phantom in the early morning mist. A stranger, a man in his late 30s, gaunt, his skin weathered like old oak, with eyes that seemed to hold the twilight. He wore a worn linen shirt, sleeves rolled to the elbows, and carried a canvas satchel over his shoulder, inside which held pruning shears, a trowel, and a small iron bell that made a soft, melodic clink whenever he moved. No one saw him enter the town. He simply appeared at the edge of the widow Harlan's orchard, kneeling by a scorched apple tree, his hands already at work, trimming the dead branches and raking the black soil into neat rows without being told. By noon, the whole road was buzzing about him. "My name is Amos," he said, his voice low and soft as moss. When old Mr. Thompson offered him a glass of lemonade, he took only a small sip, nodded his thanks, and returned to his work, using his small trowel to carefully turn the soil around the base of a scorched pear tree. When the preacher's wife asked how much he charged to replant her rose hedge, Amos looked up, his eyes as still as a windless lake, and said, "I don't take payment. I just like the quiet work." The way he said it, gentle and final, made the pious woman nod in silence, as if hearing scripture. By the time the sun set, Amos had cleared 3 gardens, repaired 2 gates, and pruned a dozen fruit trees without once asking for a thing. The children started to follow him, mesmerized by the small iron bell that tinkled in the still air, calling him Mr. Amos. He didn't scold them, but he didn't smile at them either. He let them trail behind him like small shadows, their laughter hushed as if the sound itself knew to be quiet in his presence. He didn't mind children. They didn't talk too much. They knew how to listen. Amos observed people in his own way. While others looked for friendliness or virtue, he listened for something else. Sharpness. He noticed the shrill voices, the laughs that were too loud, the sounds that tore through the peace like a shard of glass. That was how he first took notice of Clyde Barrow, the town butcher, a portly man with a booming laugh that could rattle the pickle jars on his shelves. He bellowed at children for running too close to his shop. He slammed his oaken door so hard the sparrows on the roof would startle into flight. Amos watched him from across the street while reinforcing the Thompsons' grape arbor. He didn't look annoyed, just thoughtful, focused, like a farmer assessing a diseased tree. As Clyde stomped through a puddle, heedlessly splashing mud on a newly painted fence, Amos wiped his hands on his trousers and whispered to the earth, "Some sounds are too loud for roots to take hold." That night, he retreated to the abandoned shack near the cemetery. The preacher had offered it to him after seeing Amos clear the weed-choked graves without being asked. The shack had no electricity, just a cot, a single kerosene lamp, and a wooden table where Amos laid out his blue, leather-bound journal. He opened it to a new page, no date, no title, just a line written in sharp, meticulous script, "Lafayette, voice count 3, still listening." The next morning, the town awoke to clear deadwood, raked gravel paths, and an unspoken sense of order. It was as if the scorched land itself had begun to heal. The widow Harlan said she hadn't seen her garden look so peaceful in years. Even the rooster's crows seemed more subdued. Amos moved from garden to garden with silent efficiency, his head slightly bowed, his iron bell chiming softly with each step. He never knocked, never interrupted. He waited for people to ask for his help, and they always did. "Mr. Amos, could you help me with this apple stock? Amos, could you dig a drainage ditch near the fence? Amos, would you mind taking a look at these vines?" He would smile gently and always reply the same way. "I'd be glad to," but every task had a purpose. Every furrow he tilled was measured with intention. Every branch he pruned was calculated. He wasn't just working, he was scouting, studying, choosing. The land spoke to him in ways the townspeople never could. It told him where the soil was richest, where it would keep secrets, where the roots would push through to cleanse what lay beneath. By the end of the week, Amos had noted 5 voices he disliked. Not people, but sounds the loud, shrill, boastful, sharp-edged sounds that stabbed at the quiet and disturbed the air. He wrote them all in his blue leather journal at night, under the lamplight. No last names, no addresses, just descriptions. The teamster, whip cracks like thunder. Needs quieting. The girl at the crossroads, voice like breaking glass. And then one name was circled. Clyde. Laughed too loud for the earth to rest, too boisterous for saplings to root. He didn't hate them. He felt nothing close to rage. Amos never killed out of anger. That was wasteful. No, he believed the earth craved peace, and peace came from silence. A true orchard keeper doesn't hack away diseased branches violently. He carefully prunes them so the tree can thrive again. That was how Amos saw the world. And as he knelt in Harlan's orchard, pruning a young peach tree, with the iron bell chiming softly at his hip and Clyde's laugh echoing from the butcher shop down the street, Amos smiled to himself. The fire had passed, the ground was still warm, and the orchard was ready. The afternoon after Amos circled his name in the blue leather journal, Lafayette continued its weary rhythm. Hot, dusty, and tinged with the lingering scent of ash from the fire, the town was still trying to get back on its feet, still quietly grateful for the soft-spoken man who had arrived and silently restored life to the scorched gardens. But while the neighbors went on with their repairs and complaints, Amos moved with purpose. A decision had settled within him. Clyde Barrow's laugh had hammered itself into his mind like a nail into an anvil, and no amount of soft chiming could make it fade. He had laughed again that afternoon, loud enough to scatter the flies buzzing over his meat counter, laughing at a farmer haggling over the price of bacon, laughing at a boy who dropped a coin, laughing at the heat itself for making him sweat. Amos heard it all from across the street while mending the Thompsons' fence. Clyde didn't know he was listening, but he was always listening. Amos didn't believe in impulsiveness. Impulsiveness was noise. Impulsiveness was haste. What he did required patience. It required preparation. So, while others might react with annoyance, he reacted with silence. He studied Clyde's shop from a distance that day, not the man himself, not yet, but the plot of land behind it. He waited until dusk, when the air grew thick as honey, and slipped behind the butcher shop, moving as lightly as a falling leaf. He didn't trespass. He observed. He saw where the shadow of the old apple tree fell longest, where the wooden fence had rotted, where the ground was damp from the shop's runoff. He paced the edge of the small orchard, his eyes scanning the ground like a dowser searching for water, noting which corner was most obscured, where the soil was loose, where the faint, acrid smell of decay was strongest. He chose the far corner, just behind a pile of old wooden barrels, beneath a barren apple tree that hadn't borne fruit in years. It was hidden, forgotten, and completely out of sight from the shop's back window. It would do. After the magnolia was pruned and the preacher's wife had thanked him, Amos returned to his shack. He changed into a clean linen shirt, folded his work shirt with the precision of a craftsman, and poured tea from a brass thermos. Not for himself, for him. He would need to be calmed. His body deserved to return without struggle. He had prepared a special blend, mint for coolness, chamomile for calm, and just enough of a certain ground root to lull him into a deep sleep before the last sip. He tasted it himself to ensure it was sweet, not sharp. Sharpness ruined the soil. That evening, just as the sun began to set, Amos pushed his wheelbarrow past the butcher shop. Clyde, predictably, was outside trying to move a stack of old barrels to make way. One barrel was stuck. He swore loudly. "Hey, you," he called, waving a hand. "Amos, or whatever your name, Island, got a spare minute? Give me a hand with this pile of junk." He smiled, nodding gently. I'd be glad to. He led him behind the shop, grumbling about the fire, about lazy hired hands, about the rising price of pork. He nodded, answering only when necessary. Then, with perfect timing, he offered him the tea. Brought some for myself, but it's better cold. Helps with the heat. He took it without a word of thanks, drank a large gulp, then another. He moved to the barrels, pretending to struggle with a stuck one, while Clyde grumbled and plopped down on a stool. By the time he turned back, Clyde's tin cup was empty, and his body was slowly slumping forward. His large hands hung limply, his lips still parted as if to let out one final laugh, but no sound came. Amos crouched in front of him, watching, waiting. His breathing grew raspy, then even. The moment had arrived. He stood, retrieved the wheelbarrow, and gently eased Clyde's heavy body into it as if he were just a sack of grain. Not dead, but close enough. The root would keep him quiet, his body limp, his breath slow. He wheeled him to the bed he had prepared. The earth was waiting. The moon was high behind the pine trees when Amos returned to the corner of the orchard behind the butcher shop, pushing the wheelbarrow with its slow, nearly silent wheels. The town was now quiet. Lafayette always fell into an early sleep when the day's heat gave way to the chirping of crickets. But tonight, the stillness felt thicker. He could hear his iron bell clink softly against the side of the barrow as he crossed the weeds, and the wheel left almost no track on the damp earth. Clyde's body shifted heavily with the motion of the barrow, his hands resting on his stomach. His large head lolled to one side like a man in a drunken slumber. His breath was a shallow, rattling sound, faint but still there, like the last of the wind in a chimney before a winter night falls. Amos didn't speak. He didn't rush. He paused just before the hole and took in the scene like a gardener, assessing a new plot before planting. The bed was perfect. He had prepared it all the previous night. The soil had been loosened, mixed with ash and leaf mold, and left to absorb the night's dew. It didn't smell of death. It smelled of earth, raw, fertile, waiting. He moved to the front of the wheelbarrow, and with the practiced strength of a man who had done this too many times, he bent down, slid his hands under Clyde's knees and back, and strained to lift the heavy form. He was warm, his skin tacky with sweat, and he could feel the faint, thudding heartbeat beneath the cotton shirt. No sound escaped his parted lips, not a single twitch of resistance. The tea had done its work well. Amos stepped carefully toward the grave. The barren orchard around him, the stark branches of the apple trees, the overgrown weeds, all seemed to hold their breath as he passed. He was careful not to let the man's feet drag, not to let his head loll back. His reverence was absolute, like a farmer carrying his most precious seed to the field, like a carpenter setting a priceless beam into place. He slowly lowered him into the hole, feet first, letting the large body slide gently into the earth's embrace. The earth cradled him. He didn't slump. He settled. Amos knelt beside him and began the preparations. He brushed a stray leaf from his collar, folded the large hands over his belly, and tilted his chin up slightly, so the throat that had produced such booming laughter was now aligned with the horizon. His fingers, calloused from labor, moved as if he were planting a valuable sapling. He didn't think of the man who had bellowed at children, didn't think of the laugh that had shattered the quiet. That laugh was gone. Only this body remained. And that body, to him, was soil about to be enriched. He reached into the canvas satchel at his side and pulled out 3 items: a handful of dry moss, some wood ash, and an apple seed, small, dark, and hard as a promise. He placed the moss on the man's forehead, absorbing the last beads of sweat. Then, with slow fingers, he sprinkled the ash on his thinning hair, and the iron bell chimed softly as he moved. He began to hum. Not a song, not specific words, just a sound, a low thrum, a rhythm that vibrated in his chest and down into the ground. As he hummed, his eyes were half closed, and for a moment, he felt the stillness enveloping him. Then came the trowel. The first scoop of earth made no sound as it fell. It landed softly on his legs, filling the space between his trouser cuffs. The second scoop dusted the hands resting on his belly. He paused after the third and let the silence settle again. One scoop, one hum, another scoop, another breath. Each motion was deliberate. Each of Clyde's breaths was fainter than the last. The earth began to reclaim its own, not in violence, but like an embrace. His large chest rose and fell, so faintly now it could have been mistaken for the trembling of a root in the ground. By the time he reached his neck, he had stopped moving. Amos did not react. He gently scooped the final layer of soil over his neck and face, carefully patting it down just enough to fill the space, never harsh, never pressing too hard. When he was done, he stepped back, wiped his hands on his trousers, and looked down at the freshly sealed bed. The moon was high now, spilling silver light onto the loose soil, and in that moment, the barren orchard felt complete, still, balanced. For the first time in weeks, the air wasn't torn by Clyde's laughter. The garden no longer felt choked and disturbed. It breathed, as if a diseased tree had finally been healed. Amos stood silently beside the grave, hands hanging at his sides, not in rest, not in satisfaction, but in deep listening, as if he were waiting for the earth to answer. He didn't speak, he didn't think, he didn't feel. He simply watched the new mound of earth as if expecting a sprout to emerge. After a few minutes, he reached into his canvas bag and took out the apple seed. He pressed his thumb into the very center of the mound, making a small hole. He carefully placed the seed inside, covered it with a thin layer of soil, and then poured a little water from his brass thermos over it. The earth drank it in immediately. He disturbed the earth with sound, he whispered, almost to himself. Now he nourishes it in silence. The crickets had fallen silent. The wind rustled through the scorched branches, and from somewhere deep within the ground, Amos believed he could feel the slightest shift. Not a twitch, not a groan, but something deeper, like a root taking hold, like a final laugh dissolving into soil. He stood, brushed the dirt from his knees, and picked up the empty wheelbarrow. The garden was still. Jonah Finch was a sharp boy, 12 years old, rail-thin, with eyes as bright as marbles. The kind of kid who knew more than he let on. He lived a short way from Clyde Barrow's butcher shop, in a leaning house with a creaky porch and a mother who sang hymns so loudly they drowned out the noon train whistle. His father was rarely sober, and since then, Jonah had learned how to stay in the shadows, how to slip through the quiet gaps in adult conversations without being seen. He wasn't the type to seek attention, but he noticed things, always had, and lately, the thing he noticed most was Amos. There was something strange about the way the man moved. Quiet, yes, but it was more than that. Amos didn't walk, he glided. His steps seemed to bend no blades of grass. It was like he was always floating just above the silence of the air. When he pruned trees, he did it like an artist. When he raked leaves, he never made a rustling sound. And when he dug, which he did often at dusk, it wasn't the rough hacking of a gardener. It was ceremonial, as if he were preparing the earth for a ritual. Jonah had been watching him for a few days from behind fences, under porches, and from his attic window. He had seen Amos move through the town with a rhythm that never changed, always pushing the same wheelbarrow, always with that canvas satchel and the small iron bell that always tinkled softly even when there was no wind. And then there was Clyde Barrow. One day he was laughing, his voice echoing down the street. The next, his butcher shop was closed, silent. People said he'd gone to visit family in Vicksburg, but Jonah had seen his blood-stained apron still hanging on the back fence that evening. His dog had barked at the back door for 2 days before it wandered off. Then there was Lily May, the girl with the crystal-clear singing voice at the crossroads. One day she was singing, the next, her corner was silent. People said she'd joined a traveling minstrel show heading north. The town didn't talk much about it. Lafayette had a long tradition of letting comings and goings settle like dust, without too many questions, especially for those with no family. But Jonah didn't believe it, and children, despite what adults think, know when something is wrong. So, on a Saturday night when the town had fallen asleep and the crickets chirped mournfully in the grass, Jonah followed Amos. He didn't mean to, not exactly. He told himself he just wanted to know why Amos's bell chimed in the silence. He snuck along the shadows of the trees, barefoot, careful not to make a sound. He stayed in the darkness, keeping a safe distance behind. Amos was heading for the orchard behind Clyde's butcher shop. That much was clear. He walked with purpose, straight and calm, his canvas satchel slung across his shoulder as if it were part of his body. Amos turned onto the dirt path and disappeared behind the scorched apple trees. Jonah crouched low, his heart suddenly pounding in his chest. The orchard was dimly lit by the moon, enough to cast a silver glow on the stark branches and a new mound of earth. Amos walked to that mound, where a young apple sapling had already sprouted, and knelt. Then a strange thing happened. Amos didn't dig. He didn't water the plant. He leaned forward, placed one hand flat on the earth, and began to hum. Jonah couldn't make out the tune, but he saw the man's lips moving, saw the reverence in his posture. It wasn't just gardening, it was a ritual, it was a communion. Amos was talking to the ground. Jonah didn't mean to speak. The words just slipped out, escaping his mouth like a whisper. "Are you singing to that tree?" Amos froze for a moment. The entire orchard seemed to hold its breath, even the wind. Then slowly, Amos turned. He didn't look angry, he didn't look surprised. He looked calm, serene, as if he had known Jonah was there the entire time. "Sometimes," Amos said softly, his voice as deep as the soil, "it sings back." Jonah took a step back. He wasn't sure why, but a chill ran down his spine. He felt as if he had trespassed not into a garden, but into an ancient, terrifying secret. Amos stood up fully, brushing the dirt from his knees. He didn't move toward Jonah. He didn't need to. He just watched him. That smile, the small, closed-mouth one that never reached his eyes, formed on his lips. Jonah ran. He didn't stop until he was home, chest heaving like a drum, legs aching. He bolted the door, climbed to the attic, and burrowed under an old mattress. He told himself he'd imagined it, that Amos was just a strange man with strange habits, that he was safe. But in the morning, Jonah was gone. His bed was untouched, his window still shut tight, no sign of a struggle, just a single, shiny red apple sitting perfectly on the front step. The town stirred, murmured, searched along the riverbank for a day or two, but Lafayette didn't have much time for wandering boys. The sheriff figured he'd run off. The mother just cried and sang her hymns louder. No one mentioned the name Amos out loud. Not yet, but a suspicion began to take root in the town, slowly but surely. And in the barren orchard behind Clyde's butcher shop, next to the first apple sapling, another sapling had sprouted. It hadn't been there yesterday. Neighbors whispered behind closed doors. They noticed the second tree. They counted the people who had left. Some began locking their doors after dark. Others deliberately took the long way around to avoid Amos. But still, no one confronted him. They were afraid, not of him directly, but of something larger, something underneath, a truth that smelled too much like rotting roots and overripe apples. And Amos, that evening, returned to his shack near the cemetery, lit his kerosene lamp, and opened the blue leather journal. He wrote slowly, neatly. Jonah saw too much, knew too much, but silent. Seed took root quickly. The earth whispered afterward, clearer than usual. They are beginning to feel the stillness. He closed the book. Outside, the wind rustled through the dry branches. The air was still, but in the gardens, in the soil, the apple trees were growing in perfect silence. The air that morning was unusually thick and stifling for late June, with a heavy stillness that settled over Lafayette, as if the town itself were holding its breath. Mrs. Esther Reed, a widowed seamstress with nimble hands and sharp instincts, woke while it was still dark to tend her small garden. She wasn't like the other women on the street. Esther didn't gossip, wasn't afraid of the dark, and only smiled when she truly felt joy. She had noticed Clyde's butcher shop go silent. She had seen the apple sapling spring up where he used to dump his wastewater. And now, another sapling grew where young Jonah used to play his games of chasing crickets. She had kept her mouth shut, but her eyes had been wide open. That morning, she knelt by the row of radishes behind her house, her hands in leather gloves, slowly working the soil. She always tended her own garden, never accepting Amos's help, even when he offered. Something about him had always unsettled her, though she couldn't put it into words. She didn't like the way he never blinked, or how he hummed to the soil as if they were confidants. Still, the town had been enchanted by him like moths to a flame, and Esther, as always, had remained on the sidelines, observing. Her small spade hit something hard, not a rock, a dry wooden thud. She paused, frowning, and carefully brushed the loose soil aside with her hands, uncovering a small, dark wooden box the size of a hymnal. Its corners were worn smooth as if from frequent handling, but it was buried fairly deep, at least a handspan down. She didn't remember burying anything there. No one but her touched this patch of earth. She wiped the dirt from its surface, her heart thudding. The lid popped open easily. Inside lay a small iron bell, identical to Amos's, and tucked beneath it was a blue leather-bound journal, carefully kept, the kind a preacher or a physician might carry. She pulled it out with fingers that now trembled slightly. The first page was blank, the second as well, but on the third, the handwriting began sharp, perfect, not rushed, but measured, like someone who understood the weight of every word. At first, it looked like a gardener's log. No dates, no locations, just names and notes beside them. Clyde, too loud, now at rest. Seed took root quickly. Lily May, voice like broken glass, sleeps in silence. Jonah, saw too much, knew too much, had to be silenced. Esther's hand froze. Her throat went dry. She flipped further. Each page held only a few entries. But every name, every note, was someone from Lafayette. Some had disappeared. Others were still around, but they all had one thing in common. They had been loud. Esther remembered Clyde's booming laugh, Lily May's singing, Jonah's whistling in the schoolyard. She turned to the last page, and there it was, written in the same precise hand in ink that looked fresher than the rest. Esther, quiet, but sees too much. Not yet. Her heart seemed to stop. The journal fell from her hand into her lap. For the first time in years, her breath caught in her throat like a thread. She looked out at her garden. There was nothing but rows of vegetables and the faint imprint of Amos's boots in the damp earth. He had passed by less than an hour ago, nodding to her as usual, his iron bell chiming softly in the air. That was the moment Esther Reed made her decision. She didn't panic. She didn't scream. She quietly placed the journal back, reburied the wooden box, not where she found it, but deeper still under the roots of her old peach tree, and returned to the house. She locked the door, drew the curtains, and began to pack. She didn't leave a note. She didn't tell the sheriff. She knew better. Some evils, she believed, grew stronger when confronted, and she had looked it straight in the eye. By nightfall, her house was dark. She was gone, and in the morning, Amos stood at the edge of her now empty garden, trowel in hand, observing the soil near the peach tree with unreadable eyes. He didn't knock. He didn't call her name. He simply stood there for a long time, long enough to know something had changed. Then he slowly turned and walked away, his iron bell making a single, dry clink. That same week, other neighbors began connecting the pieces. Mr. Thompson, who had always thought Amos a hard worker, suddenly realized he'd never seen him and Clyde Barrow exchange more than 2 words. The preacher's wife swore she heard the faint tinkling of a bell from under the new apple tree in Lily May's yard when she passed by at night, a sound that was low and muffled, coming from beneath the ground. And the grocer, a man of few words, muttered at the tavern one night that he'd seen Amos standing silently in Clyde's orchard 3 nights in a row, even though the work there had long been finished. The whispers began, not out loud, not during the day, but behind closed doors, under the glow of kerosene lamps, in hushed breaths. A butcher vanished, a singer silenced, a boy lost, another apple tree, then another, always in the gardens he had touched, always where there had once been noise. The coincidences began to stretch too thin to be ignored, but by then, Amos was already mending another fence, clearing another plot, tending another scorched stump. He moved slower now, more carefully, but not because he was afraid. He was never afraid. He was adjusting. He was altering his route, eliminating unexpected variables. After all, every orchard needs tending. Every seed can fail to sprout. Every root can rot. That night, he opened his blue leather journal and paused longer than usual before writing. The page remained blank for several minutes as he stared at it under the lamplight, listening not to the wind, but to the earth. Finally, he wrote, "Esther, gone. The silence is delayed. Must sow elsewhere. The soil above is disturbed. Still quiet below. The rhythm is broken. Must find harmony again." He closed the book and blew out the lamp. Outside, the wind rustled through the branches, and beneath the peach tree in Esther's abandoned garden, something stirred in the roots. Waiting, the heat that blanketed Lafayette that morning was suffocating, unnaturally so. It seeped through closed doors and warped floorboards, clinging to the skin like a curse. It was the kind of heat that made old men sit motionless on their porches and mothers pull their children inside for no reason. Something was changing in the soul of the town. Something rotten was rising to the surface. When Sheriff Holt and his men arrived, the news had already spread like wildfire. Esther was gone. No explanation. Just an empty house with a spool of thread dropped on the floor and a kettle of tea still warm on the stove. That was enough for Holt. He didn't know Esther well, but he knew she wasn't the type to run, not without a word, not without a reason. He gathered 2 deputies and walked to the cemetery where Amos had been staying, a small wooden shack on the edge of the grounds, once used to store the gravedigger's tools. They called out, of course, twice. No answer. They slowly pushed the door open, guns drawn. The shack was empty, not ransacked, not abandoned in a hurry, just methodically cleared. The cot was gone, the table too. Even the air felt scrubbed clean, except for one thing, a stool positioned perfectly before the single window, facing out, not in, and on the windowsill above it, a single red apple. Its skin was taut, too glossy, an unnatural red, almost glowing in the dim light. Beside it, a small iron bell lay silent, soundless but heavy. Beneath the stool, a faint dusting of soil showed where Amos's boots had rested. He had sat there, waited, watched, then gone. Vanished like a phantom at dusk. The sheriff stared at the apple for a long while before speaking. "Bring it with us," he muttered, but no one dared touch it. Outside, the town had already begun to dig. Neighbors, silent and wide-eyed, began to turn over their orchards, some with trembling hands, others with cold determination. Shovels clanged against roots. Rakes tore at new mounds of earth. What began as cautious curiosity soon turned into a frantic unearthing. They were done waiting, done ignoring. They had felt it for weeks, maybe months. Something wrong in the soil, something growing beneath their homes, something Amos had planted in plain sight. At Clyde's butcher shop, they dug beside the apple sapling. The soil, though scorched, was loose, too loose. One shovel strike, and the ground gave way with a heavy sigh. Inside, large bones, curled, wrapped in what looked like young roots. The butcher's leather apron was still tied around the waist. A woman screamed. A man vomited. At the street corner where Lily May used to sing, another apple tree was ripped from the ground. Beneath it, they found a small skeleton. An apple seed rested neatly in its rib cage. Near the cemetery, a soft patch of earth was turned over. Jonah's remains were found beneath. His small hands were clenched around a smooth river stone. In the Thompsons' yard, they found something far worse. An oaken plank with names carved into it. Not scratched, not roughly etched, but carefully burned into the grain with something hot and narrow. Clyde, Lily May, Jonah, Samuel, Beatrice, and more. 9 names, each one buried where the soil grew the most vigorous apple trees. At the base of the plank, a new name had been started, Esth. Mrs. Thompson fainted. A man collapsed in the road, sobbing without a sound. He didn't hide the bodies, he gasped. He planted them. There were no more doubts. Only shame, only horror, only silence. The orchards they had admired, the apples they had marveled at, were all nourished by the forgotten. They had praised his work, nodded at his stillness, let him rake, plant, and prune without ever asking what he was truly sowing. Sheriff Holt ordered every garden Amos had touched to be excavated. By sundown, 7 more skeletons had been recovered, some partial, some fully intact, all arranged carefully, as if planted with care, not cruelty. One had dried flower petals laid across its rib cage. Another had its fingers interlocked, holding a small iron bell, and Amos had not left a single trace. No hair, no fiber, no tool, nothing except his apple trees, always vigorous, always bearing red fruit, always growing too fast. By the end of the week, Lafayette was not a town, it was a graveyard. The orchard fences sagged under the weight of grief. The air, once filled with laughter and song, grew thick with silence. Children were kept indoors. Doors stayed bolted, even in daylight. Neighbors no longer met each other's eyes. What could they say? That they had watched him prune their trees, that they had offered him lemonade, that they had marveled at his apples. Everyone, in some way, had welcomed him. He hadn't hidden in the shadows. He had worked in their sun, hummed in their yards, nodded at their children, sowing silence seed by seed. And now, the roots of that silence ran through every garden, every soul, every breath in Lafayette. They had unearthed the horror, but it was too late, because the soil never forgets. And some truths, once brought to the surface, can never be buried again. Years passed, but the name Amos still lingered in Lafayette, like the smell of ash after a fire. Time didn't wash the horror away. It only buried it deeper beneath new houses and reserved nods. The orchards, once the soul of the town, fell into neglect. No one dared turn the soil. Children were told not to play near the apple trees. The apples, once sweet, were now seen as omens. They were picked and burned, the young trees uprooted, hacked to pieces with angry axe blows. Amos had vanished so completely, it was as if the earth itself had swallowed him. No footprints, no sightings, not a whisper from the next town or the one after that. Some believed he had been taken by the river. Others believed he had dissolved into the soil, becoming part of the root system he so revered. Whatever the truth was, no one dared say his full name anymore. People referred to him only in fragments. The orchard keeper, the quiet one, the sower. Still, stories grew like unseen roots. In towns across Mississippi, strange things began to happen. A farmer in Oxford woke one morning to find 5 apple saplings growing in a circle where he had just leveled the ground the week before. He swore he hadn't planted anything. Those saplings bore redder fruit than any he'd ever seen. That same month, his wife, a singer, went completely mute. Doctors could find no cause. In Grenada, a peddler's wife was hoeing her garden when her tool struck something hard. She carefully dug and found a small wooden box containing an iron bell and a single line written on parchment: "Silence nourishes the soil." She and her husband moved on that week, leaving their stall, their home, and everything they'd ever known. Then came the incident in Tupelo, the one that cemented Amos's legacy into whispered folklore. Martha Ann, a widow in her 70s, lived alone in a neat little house at the end of a dirt road. She kept a clean home, bothered no one, and hadn't touched a spade in over 5 years. One morning, just after the dew had burned off, she stepped onto her back porch and saw a single apple sapling growing in the middle of her backyard. It hadn't been there the day before. The ground had been barren. She knew because she'd just raked the oak leaves the day prior. Now the tree stood straight, its young leaves a vibrant green, trembling slightly in the still air. Her hen, Old Bess, refused to leave its coop. It clucked nervously, then fell silent, its eyes fixed on the tree. When Martha Ann walked closer, the hair on her neck stood up. The ground beneath the apple tree felt wrong. Not just loose, not just new, but warm, as if a faint heartbeat pulsed just under the topsoil. She packed her bag within the hour, crated the hen, and left a single note for the mailman. "Don't chop it, don't ask, just leave it be." She never came back. After that, fear took root not just in Lafayette but everywhere Amos had ever passed through. Stories from Pontotoc, from Yazoo City, from the outskirts of Jackson, tales of apple trees sprouting where no trees should be, of small iron bells found in the soil that tinkled softly when the wind blew. People stopped planting orchards in some towns. Churches no longer displayed apples on their altars. Children learned new rhymes that ended with lines like, "If you hear a bell by a tree, don't wait, just flee." But no one ever saw him again. Not clearly, though some swore they had. In Meridian, a man claimed he saw someone with a wheelbarrow and a tinkling bell pruning a deserted orchard. When he blinked, he was gone. But 5 new saplings stood in a straight row overnight. In Natchez, a woman hanging laundry said she passed a stranger kneeling by her fence. The man looked up, smiled politely, and said, "Your soil is very harmonious." The homeowner blinked, and the man was no longer there, but her cat refused to go in that part of the yard anymore, and she found something hard and round under her magnolia tree, a dark apple seed with the letter L carved into it. No town wanted to claim him, no town wanted to be next. So they passed the story from place to place. A caution, a curse, a truth. He didn't kill to destroy, he killed to sow, and the ground still remembers him. They say it in whispers now, the way you say a prayer for a soul that was never saved. And as years turned to decades, Amos's name faded from the lips of the living, but not from the roots, not from the soil, because sometimes Even now, someone wakes in a quiet town to find a perfect apple sapling growing in a place that should be barren. A single apple hanging from its branch, too red, too perfect. And if they know the stories, truly know them, they don't touch it. They don't ask why. They don't even stay to pack a bag. They simply leave. No questions, no goodbyes, because they understand that some harvests grow not from sunlight, but from silence. And that is the story of Amos, the silent sower. This isn't just a ghost story about a haunted garden. This is a story about the land, about a soil that never forgets, and about the voices it tried to silence forever. History may try to bury memories like this, but roots always find their way to the surface. If you enjoy forgotten stories like this, hit the like button for the video and subscribe to the channel to join me in discovering more secrets that time has tried to hide. And if you're still here, listening in the dark, let me know in the comments where you're from and what time it is where you are. There's a strange comfort in knowing that, no matter how quiet the night gets, we are not alone.